Hoş geldiniz. İyi akşamlar. Nice to see some new faces and some old friends. So you already had a little bit of a conversation, right? And so I'm curious who's enlightened here. You? Okay, thank you for your courage. You too?
Yeah, I feel like within these 2 weeks.
Who's working on becoming enlightened? In the power of now. I don't know if you have looked it up. Anyone has the power of now or looked it up? Yeah. Did you look it up, what Eckhart has to say about enlightenment? Only a very small paragraph. And he says, or writes, enlightenment is oneness with being. Right? And then on the next page, a few sentences later, he says, the Buddha said, enlightenment is the end of suffering. Right? And so, what's interesting there is that he doesn't really talk about an individual in that sense, being enlightened, because if enlightenment is oneness with being, and then Eckhart goes on to say being is everything there is, right? Then when you or anyone says, I am enlightened, then there is an I, right, a subject, and there is enlightenment, something else. And so it's not one, it's two. And so that's why he doesn't say much more about that, because it would just strengthen the ego to say I can reach enlightenment. Right? And since the ego cannot be enlightened, because it's the separate sense of self that cuts us off from being, you would never get there. On the other side, if you say you're not enlightened, then you're not really alive in a way, because we're always in touch with being, or what I rather call the life force, or the co-creative life force. Right? Because if you would not be, or your body would not be in touch with that life force, you would be dead. Right? You're not doing anything to keep your body alive. I mean, not in this moment. I mean, you breathe, but nobody has ever killed themselves by stop breathing. Right? Have you tried? It's impossible. At one point, your body says, no, we're breathing. Right? So your body just stays alive, but not because of you or your ego, but because something that we can all feel. This, most people don't, right? But you can feel this incredible gift of being alive. And so why, there were a few more questions, right? So we may talk a little bit more about enlightenment, but again, there is not that much to say about, because it's always there, And I'm not one of the people who thinks that, oh, it's always there, you can just go like this and become enlightened. Right? It's unfortunately for most people, there's two ways to enlightenment, the hard way and the easy way. Which one do you want to choose? Any preference? Actually, you have no choice, so it's a stupid question. The hard way is through suffering. Right? You know the story about Eckhart, or maybe you don't, but he was very depressed and suicidal and very unhappy with his life and suffering badly. And one evening or one afternoon, he said, I can no longer live with myself. I cannot no longer live like this. And then some people, they commit suicide, right? They can no longer live with the pain, with the suffering. And the only way out is to kill their body. Which, as one of my friends said, is a permanent solution to a temporary problem. Right? So remember that. If you feel suicidal. And then the next morning when he woke up, he heard the birds singing, and he was amazed that he was alive. And he writes, he doesn't even know what really happened to him, but for a few months he was just in this state of feeling fully alive. Right? And just that was enough. I'm alive. Wow. I'm in this world, or I'm off this world, and I'm alive. And then he got curious what happened to him, and all of a sudden he became a spiritual teacher, right? Because other people wanted what he had. And he's pretty good at that. So it's the best I ever met. So the more you get into the shithole, right, the more you suffer, the stronger this force of wanting to get rid of the suffering may be and put you out of your suffering. And I think that happens to 1 in 100 million people. Most people just get stuck in their suffering. So that's not a good path, I think. Right? Because the chances that you get where Eckhart supposedly is, right, are small, and you as a self, as I already said, cannot get there, right? It happens to you, and the chance that it happens is very small. And the other only way we know how to get there is through meditation, through mindfulness. And as we now know, for maybe 20 years or so, is also through healing our wounds, right? Doing some psychological work. Because our unconscious, right, where our childhood trauma is stored, prevents us from finding that peace, because it's constantly in kind of a panic state, right? It's constantly afraid. That's another definition of enlightenment that some people give, is the end of fear, right? To no longer be in fear, to be free from fear. I have another friend, a spiritual teacher, he always asks people, are you free? Right? Are you free? Are you free? Well, free of what? Well, free of fear, right, would be the best answer I can say, and fear is the opposite of love. So enlightenment, you could also say, is love for everything that arises in the moment. And so my friend Ken Wilber says, enlightenment is an accident, but meditation makes you accident prone. It's more likely that you have these experiences once you meditate a while. And you probably all had these experiences where there all of a sudden was no more sense of a separate self. You were maybe in blissful joy, right? Or you were doing something in which you completely lost yourself. Right? I'm a musician, and there were these moments where I was just watching my hands and saying, what is happening here? There's no more doer and doing, right? It's just being. So when something flows through you, right, where you're just allow this life force to flow through you, when you play or do something that you're not unconscious, right? There's still a sense that something is happening through you, but it's happening through you without doing. Anyone has experienced these moments? Like what Abraham Maslow called the peak experience, right? Where life was just flowing through you. Maybe you fell in love or saw a baby to be born or something that was so powerful that you just had to allow it to happen. Right? And so this is usually where these talks kind of like are at an end, right? Because I think for 3 years I was invited to La Jolla, that's between Los Angeles and San Diego, and they had the Inner Directions gathering there, they called it, and that was Matthew Rosenblatt. He has a publishing company, and they were publishing the works of Ramana Maharshi, who was arguably the most awoke saint of the 20th century in India. I don't know if you heard of him. He was, I think, 14 when he became enlightened, and he went to the top of a mountain and never left. He spent the rest of his 80-year-long life sitting on that mountain. And as you know, in India, when there are sages, people bring them food. Right? When they recognize people as enlightened, they feed them, and well, that's basically all they need, is some food, right? They don't maybe bring them clothes. So if you want to get free food, just get enlightened and move to India and free Indian food for the rest of your life. It's not too bad. Anyway, every year they had a 3-day gathering where they invited the most famous enlightened or spiritual teachers, and that's how I learned about Eckhart, actually. As I was playing in a band of my neighbor, and the bass player, he was always busy, but sometimes we had like brief conversations what I was into. And I said, I'm into Abraham Maslow and the Dalai Lama and Stephen Covey and personal growth and Carolyn Myss and whatever I was into at the time. And one day he said, my wife just came back from this conference, and at the end of the conference, most people had already left, half of the people had left. There was this completely unknown guy, and he blew everybody's mind, almost literally, right? And she bought the tape of his talk. And so he gave me a copy of this tape, and I put it into my Walkman. You're too young to know what a Walkman is. That's like a motor that turns tape, right? These cassettes.
I used to have that when I was a kid.
A kid,
Yeah. I used to have it.
This is heritage also. In the 1980s.
Right. Okay, you're old enough to know what a Walkman is. It's basically you have to walk, right? And it's only for men, and you listened. You walk, man, and you listen to something, right? Anyway, I put the thing in my Walkman, and there was this voice: no expectancy, not waiting for anything to happen, just being here in the present moment, and on, right? And I was like, whoa, I've never heard anything like that. And that was in spring 2000, and it was obviously Eckhart Tolle, before he became famous. And so anyway, I was there doing the recordings, and there was one guy, I forgot who he was, but he said, I'm going to now speak for 5 minutes about the unspeakable. Why can you not speak about enlightenment? You know by now why you can't? Because enlightenment is not separate from anything that arises that already is. So when you speak about it, you make it into something that it is not. So I said, I'm going to talk about that for 5 minutes, and then for the remaining 55 minutes, I answer your questions about the unspeakable. Right? And that's the paradox of what we're attempting here. So if you're all disappointed now, you're obviously not enlightened. And so in the Tao Te Ching, the Tao that Lao Tzu wrote 2,500 years ago, do you know what the first thing is that he wrote in the Tao? Anyone? The Tao that can be spoken of is not the true Tao. So it was basically saying everything, the 89 verses or whatever that followed, are all not the truth. Right? Because whenever you open your mouth and explain something, there is always a subject and an object. Right? You talk about something, and that's duality, that's not oneness. So that's why in the Power of Now book up there, there's one of the first real question, what is enlightenment? The answer is very short. But then the book isn't over, right? He still has to talk a lot of what enlightenment is not. And we can talk a lot about what enlightenment is not, right? Obviously. I mean, pretty much all talking we do has nothing to do with enlightenment. By definition, it doesn't. And I also may add something to Eckhart. So I was very taken by him, obviously. And I bought a book, and have you ever read a book that completely fascinated you and you knew that will change your life? Anyone had that experience? Nobody?
Yes, I have read, but I have forgotten because you need to read maybe twice or 3 times to be able to understand it. Just one time, it's not enough to be to proceed in your life.
Yeah. Yeah, these are the books that you read over and over. Right? Anyone had a book like that you got and you went like, whoa, this is like... Right? And that was my second book where I had this, where I knew this would transform my life.
This one?
The Power of Now, yes.
Actually, I read this book also. In Spanish of it, I read it, but it's been a long time. But I will read it again after this meeting.
Yeah. I think I read it 9 times now. And I started to read it again, and I go like, wow, the message is totally different. Right? The words are the same, but how I interpret them, how they touch me, are different from before. So the first book was The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People by Stephen Covey, who brought me on this whole trip of personal development. And the third book was Integral Spirituality by Ken Wilber. And the fourth one was Evolutionary Enlightenment by Andrew Cohen. And now I'm at the fifth one, which is the NARM approach to healing developmental trauma. So 5 so far. We'll see if there will be another one. They always seem to be spaced out at approximately 6 years. 5, 6 years, then something new comes. And so, just to say where I'm now, you obviously, if you want to awaken, right, let's call it more awakening, because I think awakening is a better word than enlightenment, right? Because it's also a bit of a process. It's not just boom, you're enlightened and then that's it. And I now like the term becoming better than being. Because even being, in a way, is becoming. Right? The universe, as we now know, is expanding. If we look at life and life forms, they become more and more complex. Right? And being can feel a little static. Right? It's sort of like be here now, as Ram Dass said. And then it's a bit like Nemo in the movie, Finding Nemo. I don't know if you've seen it. Remember the last scene where he's in the plastic bag back in the ocean, right? And then he goes like, now what? It's a little bit like with enlightenment. Now what? Now I'm enlightened, and now what? Right? So that's where people came up with this insight of evolutionary enlightenment, right? That we're not only here in a way, which is true, right? We're here now, but there's a next now and a next now and a next now and a next now, and there is becoming. I mean, even Eckhart, sometimes when I read stuff, he has changed his teaching a little bit and is adapting to the overall becoming of the world. So if you use his other saying, and that comes into the book later in the book, that enlightenment is to surrender what is. Right? Then what you're aware of, or what is, increases in complexity. So you know about these sages, they move into a cave, right? And they sit in a cave. Or last night we just watched Into the Wild, a young man who went into Alaska by himself. Right? And so sometimes people, they very much simplify their life in order to become enlightened, to awaken. Right? They go to India in an ashram, maybe they have some money, and then life is very simple there. That's why monks who go on this path of enlightenment, they often live, or they have to live, very simple life. But you're not monks. I'm not a monk. Right? Our lives are more complex. And so to surrender what is very relatively simple if there is little complexity, and very hard if you have a job and kids and parents and live in Istanbul, need to fight through traffic, and that's different than being in an ashram, right? Or the Sufis or whoever you have as models, right? They lived simple lives. And they didn't have relationships, right? They were celibate, they didn't have girlfriends. because they mess up your enlightenment like that. Right? Or if you're a woman and want to get enlightened, the nuns, right, they also don't have boyfriends. And it gets really screwy when they violate that vow of celibacy and of not loving another human but loving the divine. Right? Much easier. That's why from an integral mindfulness or from an evolutionary perspective, it doesn't stop with some kind of enlightenment experience. Then this is where life starts, where you consciously become the best version of yourself by learning, healing, growing, and awakening. Right? So it's a full-time job, basically, while you live your life. So what's alive in you right now? I want to have this maybe more as a dialogue and not just a monologue. And I don't think that's actually that bad of a paradox, right? Because, as I said, we're always also becoming. So there's being and becoming. And if we're clear about our life path, right, then what we want to do, there's nothing wrong in opening to possibilities there, so that when the opportunity arises, then we can move, right, become. But it always happens in the present moment, the next step. So Eckhart actually talks quite a bit about that, about planning in the now, for example, right? Making plans. That maybe seems like a paradox, right? If you're always present in the moment, why would you plan anything? But it's impossible, right? Because you need to eat, you need to go to the bathroom, you need to, we need to do things. Go ahead.
I would like to share my present experience when you when you don't feel some stability in the life, and maybe it's my first experience when I don't know what will happen to me tomorrow, because it's the situation around me so unstable. So it's for me very interesting, and not have any. You when you have no anything to keep for support, because there are nothing to, you and it's so interesting condition. It's of course it's frightful a lot, but it's very interesting. It looks like you're in a flood. You you fly, and I'm getting myself on feeling um, this situation, and I understood that I like it, because there are nothing inside of me that block my body, block my mind, uh, and I like it a lot. Maybe and I I enjoy this. I understand that it's. Uh, I have no any support from something. For example, my job is my support, but I have no job, and it's absolutely unpredictable. What will happen? We will find it. I came from another country, and I don't know what to happen to me tomorrow. So, but I catch myself it's so pleasant condition that you. I'm not afraid to lose my job, for example, because it. Um, or, for example, something happened in my life, in any other sphere, in relationship or with my relative, my friends, and you're trying to find support in another sphere of your life. For example, oh, I have problem here, but there is okay with my work, and I I took it like a support in this situation. But now it's in all side of my life is so predictable situation that I like it because I can to find support in myself.
Yeah.
And
It's nothing to hang on
yes,
to.
and I'm trying to develop this process. The universe and me the whole thing, and I like it a lot.
Mm-hmm.
I can say that I'm calm and I'm enjoying it for all time, but this thing helped me to be calm, to be happy, and maybe it's another illusion of me because I'm I'm trying to find the support in it, but it's not uh, you're when you trying to take something material like money, like people, in trying to support in them, uh, you are pressed a lot. But in this way, in opposite situation, you're moving like you tell it's you're in the process like waterfall,
Mm.
and it gives lightness.
Yeah. Thank you.
I so
Yeah. Can be freeing if you have nothing to lose, nothing to hang on to. Right? And again, we can go both ways. We can become more free, or we can become totally desperate and panic. And what opens more to the life force, to this being that's always there? The letting go and allowing, or the fear, the shrinking down? And most people, it's not that they go into fear, but their unconscious mind, right, goes into this fight, flight, freeze survival mode. I have to have this, I have to have that. And that cuts us eventually off from the life force and seeing opportunities. And on the other side, it also drives us to action when there is time to act. But we no longer act from fear, but from seeing invitations, I call that. From taking opportunities or seeking opportunities. Because they're always there, but when we act from fear and say, I have to have this, then we often don't see all other possibilities. Anybody else? That's why I now, for quite some time, see life as invitations. I make invitations, like inviting you here. And I also I'm always open to see where are there invitations to be of service in my case. And if you probably think about your life, if I think about my life, the biggest things that happened weren't things that I was pursuing, but I felt I was readying myself to when the invitation came, that A, I could see it, and B, I could say yes to the invitation. And every day there are many invitations. Just this evening, right, you probably had 20, 30 invitations. You could have watched TV or hang out with friends or do some hobby or, many, many possibilities, right? And you chose to come here. And there is no point in thinking, oh, I think this was a mistake, I should have done something else. Right? That's also part of enlightenment or a spiritual path, is that once you chose, you're not looking back and say, I should have chosen differently, because that would be living in the past. And then you're not getting out of this what is offered, right? And if you feel you want to take advantage of another invitation, I actually admire the people most who get up and say, thank you, I think I'll go, I take another invitation. Right? Because they're more free than the people who sit here for 1.5 hours and go like, what kind of bullshit is this? A fucking waste of my time, right? Then you're not free. The people who leave are more free often than the people who stay. Of course, if you stay out of free will, that's also brings joy to me. Right? And so when I think about my life, I didn't look for a spiritual book or a teacher. This friend, invited me to listen to this tape, and then not much happened for me. I mean, that's all like one's life story, right? But if you look, there's often like these phases where you just get ready for something, right? You learn something, or maybe just live your life, right? In a way, and it may seem boring, and then all of a sudden, there's a message in Facebook, we want to invite you to come to Istanbul to train integral relationship coaches. There's the invitation. Am I ready to move from LA to come to Istanbul? Yeah. So that's why I'm here, not because I think I should move somewhere in the Middle East. And I was okay where I was living, and that's now, right? I'm okay living here. I'm not thinking about living somewhere else or doing something else. And maybe there will be another invitation where I go like, oh yeah, that's where I want to move towards, right? And it can be anything, right? We don't know. I don't know what the next invitation will be. At least that's how it feels.
Thank you for your mail. This invitation.
So, what are the obstacles you face as you start this journey? Who has started the journey?
Trying.
You all have.
Yeah.
You cannot live without being on the journey. Right? And there's good news. The older you get, right? Age is really helping. Right? Aging seems to help for most people to to be more calm and more in the present. At least I hope. At least that's how it feels for me. Let's put it that way. I mean, just the fact that you're here already is clear that you're on the journey. And one thing that I learned and sometimes saddens me a little bit about being here. So after I listened to this tape and bought a book and then bought books for my neighbors, that was what I tried to say earlier, but nobody raised their hand. But usually when I find a very exciting book, I try to get everybody else to read it. My friend said, oh, there is a retreat with Eckhart in 1.5 years. Do you want to come with us? He and his wife. And I talked to my wife, and she said, okay, yeah, we can go. And so I signed up for that retreat. It was sold out within a few weeks then. It was only 100 people. And I didn't know what a retreat is. Okay? Do you know what a retreat is? Well, that's where you go away from the world and you go into a forest, or you retreat from the world and you just focus on yourself and the little community. I didn't know that. Right? And I said, well, what do people do there? And they said, well, we're meditating. And so meditating, I don't know how to meditate. So I joined a Buddhist Sangha, it's called the Buddhist community, very small, 30 people, 40 people. And one morning I was walking with the Lama. Lama means teacher. And we talked a little bit about, that I'm into Eckhart Tolle and the spiritual path. And she said, it doesn't really even matter which path you take to, metaphorically speaking, climb up the mountain, but once you found your path, you will never get to the mountain if you don't keep climbing. Right? You don't want to take a little from here and a little bit from there and a little bit from there and start a new path every week. Right? We call that cafeteria-style spirituality. Right? You know what a cafeteria, you have that, of course, in Turkey, where you pick a little bit from here and a little bit from that, right? And a little bit from here, I don't like that, I only want this. Right? And so what she suggested was to find the path and to stay on it. And sometimes people are excited to come here or after they're here and say, oh, I'm going to come back next week. That was great. I feel so good. And then they don't come back. And, maybe they found another group that they keep going to for a few years. But I'm suspicious, right, that they're not staying on a path. Right? And it's a little bit tricky to find the right path. And what's really important, that's more a Ken Wilber thing, on your path to enlightenment, it's not like this climbing up a mountain. That's really a bad metaphor. What's happening also in your brain and in your body is that when we do the meditation, now in a few minutes, is that you will inevitably have what we call a state experience. You will get into an altered state. Right? Your brain will literally fire differently. It's like when you go to sleep at night and you go into a dream state, right? Your brain activity is changing. Right? And when you go into dreamless sleep, your brain activity is changing. Your brain is still active, but it's working on a different vibration, if you will. Right? And these state experiences, they show you what's possible. Right? You have a brief, temporary experience of just feeling better, feeling more connected, feeling more present, feeling more alive. Okay? And then you walk out the door, and maybe for an hour you still feel good, and then you drop back into your old self, and actually you feel a little bit more shitty than you felt before you came here. And that's where most people then go like, I don't know, that didn't really do it, right? Now I feel like I felt before. But the more often you have these state experiences, right, the more present and surrendered you start to become. Right? And for some people, actually, they go really into a hole if they have been traumatized or they have a lot of pain, what Eckhart Tolle calls the pain body. Those of you know Eckhart, that's one of his big words, the pain body. Right? And the pain body is, for most people, repressed. Right? Why would we want to feel the pain in our body? Talking about emotional pain, depression, also physical pain. Right? So we disconnect, our nervous system does that itself. It disconnects us from this pain. And so when you open up to allowing more of the experiences, this life force, you open up to this being one with the life force, or one with being, as Eckhart says. Guess what comes up? It's not just all the lovey-dovey stuff, right? So like, now spirit is manifesting through me and I'm enlightened and I'm free. No, what first comes up is the shit that happened to you throughout your life. Right? That was stored in your body. And then a lot of people give up and says, now when that happened to me too, I was actually more miserable when I got into the power of now after a few months of hope, right, than I was before. Because now I kind of realized what I was missing, and all of a sudden I started crying. I never cried before. I had all this painful feeling. I felt my wife doesn't love me. I lived this kind of hopeless life. Right? And just being in the now was like, well, I'm now in a shitty life, so why is that better than not being in the now in a shitty life, right? So this is not as easy as, and I say this with all respect, as sometimes Eckhart makes that sound. Right? Just be here now and then everything will be great. And surrender to what is. Right? If your life sucks, then that's maybe not the best solution. And he also writes in The Power of Now, and I think that's a very good advice that I still often give people, is you either accept what is if you cannot change it, or you change the situation if you can change it, which you do in the now, obviously, or you leave the situation. Right? If you're in an abusive relationship or in a bad job or with the wrong people, whatever, and you cannot change the situation, and it's also impossible for you to accept it. Right? We don't need to accept everything, because then we would become a doormat. Right? You know that term? Everybody walks over you. Right? That's not being enlightened, to let people take advantage of you and not realizing your full potential. Right? You change the situation, you leave it, and if both is not possible, then you accept it. Otherwise, you're going to go mad. Right? If you fight something that you cannot escape and you cannot change, then you surrender. And so what really helped me was that a while after I learned about Eckhart, actually the first time I met him, after I met him, I drove home from San Francisco, and there you can see how naive I was. I thought there must be other people who are interested in this stuff. I didn't even know, right, what was going on spiritually in Santa Rosa, and I found a Course in Miracles group. Anybody knows the Course in Miracles? Yeah? Eckhart refers to it sometimes. And then through that I found the Center for Spiritual Living, and I became a musician there. And then I started the Power of Now group there. And for 5 years, every Wednesday, we met sometimes 20 people, sometimes 30, sometimes 5. And we listened to Eckhart reading The Power of Now. And of course, I meditated every day. I learned to meditate in this Buddhist Sangha. And then 5 years later, I understood the last question in The Power of Now, which I will... You want to know what the last question is and what the last answer is?
Yeah.
Anybody know? I asked so many people, oh yeah, I read The Power of Now, I'm into Eckhart Tolle, oh yeah, present. I said, what's the last question in The Power of Now?
What is enlightenment? Right? That's not the last question?
It's the first question.
Oh.
It's close.
Okay.
It's close. Yeah. The last question is, when do I know that I have surrendered? I think I told you before.
Yeah.
Right? When do I know that I have let go, right? Of expectation, of desire, of hatred, of attachment. When do I know that I'm free? And what is his answer?
When you stop asking that question?
Yeah. When you no longer have to ask. Because the Power of Now is really, at the beginning, a very simple answer, right? What is enlightenment? What is enlightenment? You already said, right? To not be separate from pure being, to be one with pure being, right? And pure being, I think, I like the word life force better, right? Be connected with the life force that brings all of this existence that we're aware of into existence. And he also mentions the Buddha to be free of suffering. Right? Pain is inevitable, suffering is optional. We'll talk about that another time, what that means. Right? And you do that by being present and to surrender what is. Right? And then the rest of the book is the ego saying, but wait a minute, what about this? Right? And what about that? That's why the book is in question-answer format, because people started to ask him all these questions, and then at one point he just wrote down all the answers. And he lived in Canada at the time then, and there was a little store, and they sold like photocopied versions of his answers to people. That's how the Power of Now started. Basically him writing down his answers that he gave to people. That's kind of an interesting story in itself, right? And so at the end of the book, right, it's basically when you have no more questions. That's when you know you're there. And I don't want to say I became enlightened, but really I had no more question. I mean, it was so clear to me after 6 years, 5, 6 years. And then the next invitation came. Right? Then I was introduced to Ken Wilber. And he has 22 books. So not just one book, but, right? Increase in complexity. I'm like, oh, there is... The world and being is much more complex than just be here in the now. But it's good to start there, right, with where Eckhart is, and to get to the point where you have no more questions about being in the now and accepting and surrender to what is. Right? And the mind goes, how do I do that? Why would I want to do that? How do I get there? What's in the way? Well, you are in the way, right?
For me, question. If you have, if you will, if you have no any desire, how to live is boring. It was clear for me that if I reach enlightenment, so I
You say if you have no more desire, life is boring.
yes, because if you don't want anything, how to live? What the sense of the life?
Or if you don't have any target or something like that, how will you improve yourself, or if you accept everything? Yeah. This may be a question.
Yeah. So, well, that's the mind that is never happy with what is. And therefore it always wants something more, something different. And so if you live your life that way, you will never be happy. Because once you get what you think will make you happy, then the mind already says that's not good enough.
Basically, you're living in the future all the time.
You're living in the future all the time because what you have in the present is not what you want.
Sometimes in the past.
And somebody said, it was actually John Gray, but maybe he has it from somebody else. He said, want what you have and don't have what you want. Want what you have.
Okay.
I want to be here right now. This is what I have. Because otherwise, I say it again, you will completely miss out on life. Of course, in the moment, you get the ice cream and you eat the ice cream, right? And it brings you pleasure. Right? There's pleasure, happiness, and joy. And a lot of people don't differentiate what's the difference. Right? And joy, right, being in joy with myself, is to be in touch with the life force. Being just ecstatic about being alive and in wonder about this world. I mean, you may all feel miserable, or some of you may feel miserable, but be clear that we are the luckiest people who have ever lived on this planet. Right? People often romanticize the past. They would be shocked to live 100 years back. No dentists, right? No painkillers, no cell phones, no electricity. Right? Life was hard. I mean, people didn't know any better. That's why they sought enlightenment to get out of this misery. But even if you think Turkey sucks and life is really bad here, that's just because you compare it maybe with a fantasy how people in California or Germany live, right? Or wherever you think, or whatever should be better. But we're still in the top 5% of the world population or something like that, or people who live here. But the point is, and I'm not saying, that pursuing goals is not worthwhile pursuing, but the pursuing you do in the moment. So if you want to learn to play the piano, you enjoy playing the piano in the moment, not in 5 years I will perform in front of 5,000 people. If you want to get an education, you enjoy the learning in the moment. If you want to be in a relationship, you enjoy the dating in the moment. Everything you do, you see if you can be so present that you're really enjoying what's happening in the now. And you do always the best in the now. And maybe my team knows that a little bit, right? It's always kind of like, is that the best you can do? Is that the best we can do, right? But then when it's done, you leave the outcome to the universe. Right? You don't get attached to an outcome. Once you know you did your best and you enjoyed giving your best in the moment, then why would you be attached to an outcome? You had a good time learning the piano, or going on dates, or getting an education, or trying to get people to join you in a group or something. And then the outcome doesn't matter. You gave your best. Otherwise you will be never happy or enjoy. But this is all stuff you can read in books, right? You don't have to come here to blah blah and on YouTube. There's enough people who say these things. The reason why you come here is to be in what the Buddhists call be in a sangha, to be together with other people who want to seek, and if you will, to just hang out with someone who's done this for 30 years, 32 years, no, 22 years. Right? Because there's something called transmission. If you become a little bit more present right now, right, then other people become a little bit more present. There's something called mirror neurons. Or recently I read about these swarms. Have you seen these big swarms of 1 million birds? Have you seen these pictures? These people filming it? Huh? Everybody has seen those, right? And they're all moving simultaneously. There is not one moving in a little and then everybody else around them. It happens way too fast. Right? It's basically so there is something going on outside their little brains, right? Outside their little bodies, that makes them all move together. And when we meditate together, when we're just in the presence of others who are practicing presence, and you can ask questions and engage, that gives you this state experience, right? That you then can wonder, why did I feel so good after I spent 2 hours here with Martin and the other people? If you feel better when you leave tonight, and often people tell me, I feel so much better now, I feel at peace, I find hope, I'm more alive, right? That doesn't happen when you sit at home alone and read a book. That's why we have religions, where people said, let's get together in the mosque and pray together. It's a different experience than just praying at home, or a church, or a temple, or a sangha. That's why this is important. And so when you focus on a physical object, you want to do that until you become very conscious that there is a self in you. Right? I call it a witness, or a consciousness, or an awareness that is aware of that object, of that candle. Right? Here am I, and there is the flame, the candle. And I'm here with the candle in the now. Because as you will see, as we go through these layers of our self, right, we will always strengthen this witnessing self that is present in the moment and aware of objects, right, that are witnessed by this self, this witnessing self. And then for most people it's easiest to start to meditate with closing their eyes. My Lama said it's better if you can meditate with open eyes, and I didn't, and 20 years later I understood what she was saying. Now I can also meditate with open eyes, but And then just listen to the sound of the bell. So it's also nice to have a bell to signal to your brain, we're meditating now. When the brain goes, when I hear the sound of the bell, we're meditating. Then take a deep breath. Take another deep breath. And bring your focused attention into your physical body. And wiggle your toes a little bit. And allow your body, beginning with your feet and your legs, and your abdomen, your belly, to relax. And take back your shoulders a little bit. Open your heart, your chest. And relax your arms and your hands. Turn your head a little bit to the left and right and front and back. And find that perfect balancing point for your head on top of your spine. And as you do this, you may notice how you can direct your attention from your mind into your body and direct it to relax. And then as you feel into your body, you may notice how your body is sending signals to your nervous system, to your mind. It's called the body-mind connection. It's an upward stream and a downward stream of awareness, of consciousness. And then relax your face and your jaw. And since we don't have that much time, we just sit for a moment, allowing your body to relax. And when you do this at home, don't try to move on before you're fully present in your body, in the here and now, and allow your body to relax. When your body is fully relaxed, bring your focused attention on your in and out breathing. Feeling your belly rise and fall as you breathe in and out. That's very important, to breathe into your abdomen, into your belly. And start counting your in and out breath. Feeling the air flowing in and out of your nostrils. And I suggest that you practice focusing on your breath until you can take 160 in and out breaths without losing count, without drifting off into the past or the future. Most people can take 6 in and out breaths before they drift off into thought. So try to make it to 8 and then to 10 and then to 12, 20 and so forth. When you can do 160, that's 20 minutes, you no longer have to count. So this quiets your mind and supports you in staying present with your breath. You being the witnessing subject and the breath being the object. And this is important because the breath is the bridge between the physical manifest world, objects in your body, and the unmanifest. And only when you're able to stay present with your breathing and your body do I suggest that you use the metaphor of a cat watching a mouse hole. Waiting for the mouse to stick out its head, and watch your mind. Watch for the next thought to arise in your mind, in your awareness. Which is usually about the past or the future. And use your breathing and your body to stay present so that this thought is not dragging you out of the present moment into the past or future. So when the thought arises, release it and come back to the here and now, present moment. And then a new thought may arise. And you just keep doing that until this witnessing self is so strong and so present that you do not get dragged out of the now. And this is the power of now. Being in joy with yourself in the now. Allowing everything to arise in the now. And then during a meditation or just at any moment in your life, you may drop into a space of deep surrender, of stillness. There's no more effort. You become stillness. You become being. As I said earlier, don't be surprised if also some painful feelings come up, some sadness. Don't focus on the feeling, but watch the feeling from your state of present moment to moment awareness in the now. You don't have to repress it, but also don't get taken over by the feeling, the emotion. Everything is welcome. And this is the state that most people refer to as enlightenment, as awakening. This effortless being in the here and now, and feeling the joy and the love and the connectedness and the oneness with being, with the life force. And then there may be a realization that even if you have this experience, there is still an experiencer and the experience, a duality. And you cannot escape this duality. But there may be this realization that even this experience arises from a ground of all being, from a source that is timeless and spaceless, infinite and eternal, that has never been born, never entered the stream of time, and will never die. And therefore knows no pain of the past or fear of the future. It cannot be spoken of or thought about. Because that would make it into something separate from you and all existence. So that's the meditation, focusing on a physical object, a candle, a picture, a flower, a stone, whatever invites you to stay present with. To stay present with your body and relaxing it. It's very important to relax your body, to stay present with your in and out breathing. I suggest 20 minutes, 160 breaths, in and out breaths. Then staying present with your mind. And by simply witnessing your mind in the present, you will no longer be identified with your thoughts, your mind. And unless they're useful thoughts, you will no longer be bothered by them. You can use your mind instead of being used by it. All these crazy monkey mind, fearful, painful thoughts, you can just release them. And then you surrender even to any kind of experience, mystical experience, emotional experience, feeling, any kind of experience will be welcomed as it arises in the moment, in the now. And in the end, you just completely let go, and your separate sense of self dissolves into the infinite, eternal, ever-present, timeless, spaceless, eternal now. Thank you.